Facebook's been accused of carelessness, of cynicism. Could the company's behavior be treasonous, though? The social media giant insists it was only offering the user experience of its services. When it did business with the likes of Huawei and TCL, Chinese firms flagged since 2012 by the U.S. for their ties to a state apparatus that long before Donald Trump's trade row accusations stood accused of industrial espionage. A storm in a Chinese teacup, or did Mark Zuckerberg compromise consumer privacy for the sake of that Silicon Valley holy grail, an invitation from Beijing to enter through the doors of the Great Firewall of China after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where 87 million users saw their data sold off for commercial and political purposes? What impact will the latest revelations have on users and on regulators more broadly? How to handle the hottest commodity we own in these digital days, our personal information. Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about Facebook and China. With us, Ralph Harfouche, founder of the Red Threat Institute for Digital Culture, co-author of The Decoded Company, Know Your Talent Better Than You Know Your Customers. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Denis Jacquet, CEO and founder of Edu Factory and the author of Uberization, an enemy. How would you translate this? An enemy who wants...
Force for good, maybe, or something. Yeah.
An enemy who wants... who only wants your best interest.
That would be it.
Is it being translated?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'm waiting for the US and Chinese translation, so if you can do something for me.
The Chinese translation brings us to Chin-Yan Li, founder of Feda Consulting, and the author of Succeeding in the Chinese Market.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being back with us.
Thanks to you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. First, it was the New York Times on Sunday unveiling that back in the day, before apps ruled, Facebook had struck a deal to partner with some 60 big tech companies to make it easy for users to go from one platform to the other. And even after third-party sharing of data stopped in 2015, the Times revealing that company officials did not disclose that Facebook had exempted the makers of cell phones, tablets, and other hardware from such restrictions. Now it turns out that those 60 companies include Huawei, the world's third largest phone maker, one that was on a list in the United States since 2012 of companies flagged as an intelligence risk. In a blog post and several tweets, Facebook answering back, those companies could not integrate people's Facebook information with their devices without that person's permission. What do you think of that explanation, Ralph Harfouche, that if you didn't have the permission of users, then it was all perfectly safe?
I think that we've seen that Facebook tends to try to make their privacy settings as complicated as possible. And I would argue that many users, to their own detriment, don't fully understand what it is they're agreeing to when they create an account on that platform. So I think we need to remember that everything that Facebook has done with these partnerships is completely outlined, and users have agreed to this under the terms of services that they signed on. So in that case, in that situation, yes, technically they are right in terms that it was up to users to specify their privacy settings. But I think the bigger question that we need to think about is how are we as people going to let our personal information and deep personal information, our likes, our dislikes, our beliefs, what influences us, our political views, our religious views, how are we going to create boundaries and limits to what companies can do in the search of profit?
Because the one article was headlined, it's the equivalent of friending Xi Jinping, the president of China. Is that true?
I think what it is it's just giving access to information that some people might not realize that they're giving. So we're seeing with the more advanced algorithms, incredibly sophisticated ways of getting information about what people are doing. And it's not just, what city you're in or where you checked in. In some cases, it's what you're looking for. It's who you're connected to. It's what your friends are doing. And all of that has a lot of value to companies that want to decode and deconstruct your behavior in order to be able to sell you certain things. And so in that way, I don't think we should be panicked. I think that and I don't think we should just be focused on China. I think, as we've seen with Cambridge Analytica and all these other things, this is a much broader policy that has wider implications than just one relationship with one country.
More broader relations with one relationship with one country. The top-ranking Democrat on the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee was asked what makes China different from other countries.
It is a market economy with a giant asterisk that says their government will force foreign-based companies, not just American companies, they will censor them, they will do things that companies will respond to they would not respond to in any other nation in the world. Secondly, the major Chinese tech companies, they are all penetrated deeply by the Chinese Communist Party. And I believe at the end of the day, owe at least as much allegiance to their government as they do to their shareholders or their business plan. And third is their willingness to come over in a much more, not just whole of government, but whole of society way to steal outside technology.
Chunyan Li, your reaction to what you heard there from Senator Warner?
Yeah, I think the perception of the data privacy and the way of dealing with the data privacy can be different from country to country. So the Chinese digital market is a separate system. But if we compare, for example, the USA to Europe and also to China, relatively it's easier to collect and to analyze different data in the USA and in China. And then in Europe, we pay more attention to the data privacy. So I think the topic is complex. We need to look at the situation in different countries. And then if we look at agreement between Facebook and the other countries, first of all, Facebook has signed the data sharing agreement with around 60 countries over the last 10 years. So when I look at the titles of the articles, since yesterday, why should we do the zoom on the Chinese companies? We also have Amazon, we also have BlackBerry, we have Samsung, we have Microsoft, for example. I think we need to look at that in a more global context, not only zooming on the Chinese companies. And secondly, I think we should look at the purpose of the data sharing. At the beginning, I think it was to facilitate the integration of the Facebook application on the device and also to improve the user experience. So how we deal with that? I haven't heard any data abuse. So I think we shouldn't panic on that topic.
Denis Jacquet, you agree?
I think, it's what she just says is really true. I mean, there's a very big difference in terms of perception and culture from China, US, and Europe. I think that in the first place, people just don't care about their data privacy because they are just giving up their life on Facebook, even in the largest details, personal life, kids, pregnancy, you see all that kind of things on Facebook. So it means that at some point, why should we care about Facebook is doing with my data when I give my data to Facebook? So the stuff is that at some point, they developed a very user-friendly application, which is called Facebook, and people gave their data, so they just don't care. So the second question is, should government, nations, international organizations should be taking more care of this data that we do ourselves in our individual life? That could be a question.
And there's certainly been a turning of the tide with the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
And I don't even think so, because if I was so concerned about my data, I would see this data Analytica problem or scandal, it depends on you name it, and say, okay, I will withdraw from Facebook. But we don't see that on the market. People still are using Facebook. Facebook is still progressing, and there's no any consequence on Facebook, on the numbers of users, everything. It means that just individual people, they just don't care. So it's more a matter between Europe, US, and China to fight all together to see who would be able to control the other or oppose the other, and not a matter of protecting our own individual privacy. I think that even states and nations don't care about that.
Reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. Unless you think Facebook is critical infrastructure, I'd consider the whole Facebook shared data with Huawei a distraction more than a scandal. Of course, the Chinese do have different rules when it comes to things like the cloud, when it comes to things like to how you set up companies in China. Is it more restrictive or is it more prone to spying and censorship than it is in the United States or here in Europe?
China has a strategy. So China is getting back progressively to this position that they had during a few centuries back. When there was the Silk Road, they were owning 95% of the commercial roads and everything. So China is progressively getting back to here. So they don't want only the commercial physical roads, they also want the electronic or digital roads. But the US wants the same, and there's only Europe in the middle with no strategy, and which is just able to start with this RGPD regulation that they started, which is just useless. And which
useless.
Is just,
this new regulation, which started a couple of weeks ago.
That's a thing for losers. So because
Why?
when you're playing soccer or basketball, if everybody is hanging on the basketball, trying to evacuate all the balls that are coming, okay, maybe your enemy will score less, but you won't score anything. So it would be it would have been nice maybe to have RGPD and at the same time a very good and strong strategy about building digital champions within the European space. That would have been something. But only playing the defensive tactic is not a good one. So China is progressing, but mainly at this stage, most of the Chinese players are in China. There's not a Chinese Facebook that you or me are using every day. So China is using it to control its population, and the US is using it to be a worldwide leader, and that's it. Yeah.
This is an essential question if we're to understand this whole problem, which is there are effectively two nations on Earth who control the lion's share of global social media, the United States and China. Why?
I mean, one, I think we can talk forever about the answer to that question, but I actually think that by reducing this question to just an issue of two countries is actually missing some of the biggest shifts that are happening in our society to date, which is that Facebook, and let's just focus on Facebook and put the US aside for a second and put China aside for a second, but Facebook as a company is now, is now a platform where over 2 billion people, 1/5 of the world's population, logs on. What we're actually seeing is the rise of an unprecedented reach of one organization to be able to penetrate not just different markets, but a crazy amount of data. We're not just talking about Facebook. Remember, we're talking about WhatsApp. We're talking about Instagram. We're talking about the bits and pieces of people's identity that are now being collected, gathered, analyzed, and then traded as this new commodity. So I think for me, the more interesting part is to not talk about China, because I think China is only one part of the equation. I think the interesting thing is to talk about what do you do when you have a company that in some ways has more reach and in some ways more power and less regulation than some of these governments.
But you heard Denis Jacquet complaining about how there is no European answer to Facebook or Weibo or some, or these companies that control between them 2/5 of
probably
of the social media around the world.
I mean, I don't really agree with the idea that people don't care about sharing their data. I think that we're in such new times that the consequences of sharing your data we're just starting to learn about now. So we're just starting to see through things like Cambridge Analytica, through things like Brexit, through things like the 2016 presidential elections. We're now, there's going to be a whole bunch of different ways that this is going to have a very big impact on our society. And I just think we never thought that this was possible. And so now we're grappling with the reality that sharing what I had for breakfast and where I went with my friends and who I'm friends with, that we didn't realize that that could actually be translated into a psychological profile that can tell interested parties how we can be influenced. And so I don't think we don't care. I think we actually just don't know.
Do you agree with that? That has your attitude in the past 3 to 6 months since all these stories have come out? Are you now thinking twice, Chinyan, before you hit send on a social media?
as a Chinese, I don't really care about it. I mean, I pay less attention to that because in the Chinese culture, the data privacy is less a concern. And we tend to mix the
Why?
professional
Why
and
is
the
that?
personal life. Because, in the feudal society, which lasted for around 2,000 years in China, many families, several families often lived in the same yard. So we knew the daily life of the others. And also, even when sometimes we go to the hospitals, we tell the doctors, what happens. There are others, sitting around listening to us. And we don't think it's it's really bothering. And also, that's very interesting, topic, because data privacy actually is one of the reasons why Chinese digital market has been developing so fast. Firstly, I agree that we need to be very careful with data privacy, but in China, as it's not a big issue. Then, for example, we have been developing very fast in the facial recognition technologies, in the AI technologies, and in China, the convenience and also the security are more important, than the data privacy, generally speaking. If we look at WeChat, which has more than 1 billion users today, we show, our daily lives on WeChat to our friends, to our clients, to our partners, to everybody. So it's really not a big issue in China. And that's why we're being more advanced, on some key technologies.
And what's the future? Because I know companies like Amazon want to emulate the Chinese and have on one page where you can do your shopping, look at your news feeds, and do your social networking all on the same page. Do you think that's going to come here?
I think in Europe it's more difficult because in Europe or in the for the Westerners we generally we separate the personal and professional life, and also we tend to use very specialized applications. For example, generally speaking, we don't invite our boss or colleagues to Facebook. So in China, we're more, we like, a very powerful application which have multi functions, but here it's different.
All right, here it is different. I'm going to put it to the rest of the panel. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, a clash of cultures in a globalized world. We're talking about Facebook in China, talking about it with Chunyan Li, founder of Feda Consulting and the author of Succeeding in the Chinese Market, Ralph Arfouche, the founder of Red Thread Institute for Digital Culture, and who's co-written a book on, profiling the workplace. Co-wrote, rather, we profile consumers, but not so much how people work in the workplace as well. Denis Jacquet, CEO and founder of the Edu Factory, and the author of Uberization, an enemy who only wants what's best for you. Is that right?
Question.
With a question mark. With a question mark. I'd like to get the answer to that.
Yeah.
Just before the break, Chunyan Li saying, hey, this obsession with privacy, it's a Western thing.
I think so. I mean, at least it's a very European thing, and especially a French thing, because we care a lot. It's very difficult to even... We have a country which is very strong and robust in terms of health, medical system, devices. Our medicine is one of the best in the world. So potentially we would be the champion of health in the world, but we need to get data to have these personalized medicines, treatments, molecules, and everything that would make France one of the leaders of the world. But the data is unusable because we have what we call like CNIL, which is a regulation instrument that we have in France. They say, oh, you don't touch to this data. So at the end of the day, we will have
protection regulator.
Yeah, our health data will be protected, but we won't have any more champion in France because that's the other people that will lead the way in a few years. So it's terrible. So because you can just limit the access to your personal data to doctors, to a medical institution, and all that stuff. Plus you have various databases that are not communicating with one another. So there's a very deep focus on data privacy in France. In Europe, because most of the regulation in France is coming from Europe, for all the countries. And when I was living in the US, you could have this background check very easily where you could find what this guy has been doing before. Has he aggressed or harassed somebody? Has he been bankrupt? Has he a very nice credit score and everything? The data is open. And as my neighbor said, it's not the culture of Chinese to protect this data. So it's a very important thing, because if we have this focus in Europe, it means that we could be the dwarf of the digital economy tomorrow. So we will die as saints when all the people, the US and China, will be living as leaders. So it's, at some point we need to have a debate between what is good for a society and what is good for the economy.
By the way, it's not just Donald Trump these days that's at odds with China. We've been following the trade rows there. The EU announcing that it is suing Beijing at the World Trade Organization over the intellectual property rights of European companies.
When they come to China, they are forced to grant ownership or usage right of the technology to Chinese entities. As you know, technological innovation, know-how is the bedrock of our knowledge-based economy, keeps our company competitive in a global market, and it supports hundreds and thousands of jobs across the European Union.
Your reaction when you hear that from Cecilia Maelstrom?
I mean, to go back to the theme of this debate, I think we're looking at the rise of a new, very valuable resource, which is data and technological infrastructure. And I think when you have countries that are playing by different economic rules, there's going to be certain challenges to having this new international market. I do think it's important, though, for the European Union and the Commission to protect entrepreneurs, because without this type of protection, I think they can get taken advantage of. I do want to say, however, just, we're talking a lot about data privacy, and we're talking a lot about China. When I really want to push to the people watching that this is less about privacy and this is more about algorithms. This isn't about what you're sharing. It's about what's happening with what you're sharing. And I think that, we're starting to see the data that we are sharing being used to influence us, being used to polarize people, being used to divide people. And that, I think, is a question that is of extreme importance to our society to deal with. I think, as you said, the data privacy question, we're already a sharing culture. The habits are already ingrained in how we are now sharing what we're doing. So I think it's too late to, the genie's out of the bottle in that respect.
So if we're good at sharing, why is it that Facebook itself is having a tough time penetrating the Chinese market?
I don't necessarily think it's having a tough time. I just think Facebook has prioritized monetization over just about everything else, including reasonable ethical data practices, and I think they're facing, when they're entering a market, as we discussed before, the Chinese have a completely different set of rules by which they have to play. They have a much larger control. They have much more rigid controls about what foreign companies can and cannot do, and that is just their right to set the rules of how to engage with that market. I think you're probably a much better expert to comment on that, but and I just again want to emphasize that this is Facebook sort of transcending borders.
The Western companies like Facebook, YouTube, like Google, they have many difficulties in entering into Chinese market because we have very strong censorship in China. Actually, the social stability, is always very important for the Chinese government. So they are controlling, all that related to the news, to the internet surfing services, all that can impact the social opinions. So that's why the Chinese digital market is a totally independent system. However, we still have some space, for some less sensitive domains like e-commerce. For example, Amazon, eBay are also present in China. But the local players, they are really very strong and they are very, very present in China. And for the Western companies, it's more difficult.
Recently the show went to Russia. Where some of the big social networking sites they try to block them, they slow them down. Some are pretty much open, though, like Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. Can you foresee the day when a Facebook-owned company could become popular in China?
I think...
what would it take?
main difficulties in entering into the Chinese market. But I think Facebook can build some partnerships in less sensitive domains. For example, in January, Facebook announced a partnership with Xiaomi. It's a smartphone brand, a very big smartphone brand in China, in the virtual reality headset domain. So I think Facebook can target to enter into Chinese market in other less sensitive domains. But Facebook directly, I think it will take much time.
Denis Jacquet?
Well, Chinese is a very interesting story because, we had this Tech for Good stuff at the Élysée Palace 2 weeks ago, so where all the leaders of the digital world were gathered 2 weeks back. And so I was on a TV show at night, and people said, okay, what do you think about this Tech Good thing? And I said, funny enough, there's not even a French guy, maybe two. There was Xavier Niel, 1 or 2 guys lost in the middle of all this American. And there was no Chinese. And the Chinese is certainly progressing more rapidly than any other country on the planet because they are investing huge amount of money to make sure that they will be the leaders in artificial intelligence, in e-commerce, in everything that will make the 20th and maybe the 22nd century. And that's where we get back to Europe and say, oh, what do we do? So we really have to have a reaction, a very fast one, because I don't see any option or opportunity for us after 5 or 6 years to be able to compete again, because the market will be too strongly in China and in the US, and there won't be anything else. There's nothing in South America. There's nothing in Africa. There's a good penetration of e-commerce in small Asian countries like Japan, Korea,
Why? Because
Taiwan.
you need this economy of scale. Because you need
because
the U.S. is this market of what 300 plus million
exactly. It's a matter
consumers.
of scale.
China 1.2 billion.
Very basically, artificial intelligence. What it does is put in computers that crunch data. So the biggest, the largest amount of data you have, the fastest this intelligence artificial will become a very nice intelligence, moderate, then strong intelligence. And if you don't have a data, you have nothing. So it's a competition to have the largest amount of data in the.
It sounds like a lost cause then, because even though Europe is a larger market per se, people speak different languages and they're all in different nations.
Still,
28 of them.
there could be a combination of. Europe could have a very nice partnership with Africa because it would make a 2 billion people market that could be using European technologies to build new digital models, and we are working on that. We are starting a few stuff on that. So if you think about a 2 million people market, wow, that makes something. But and at this stage, China is in Africa, but for commerce. The US is not here. Facebook, Amazon, they are not there at this point or very lightly. So there's a 3 to 5 years opportunity for European companies plus government to invest massively, have a huge partnership with Africa and build something with 2 billion people behind. And that would be a third very nice competitor, an alternative to the existing giants. Yeah.
We need that critical mass.
I think the critical mass is important. I think the different structure of government is an important factor. Like, yes, they're definitely leading in AI investment and all that stuff, but they're also leading in the adoption of some of the most sophisticated private citizen surveillance infrastructure that we've seen. We've seen a lot of companies like Google in the past that have had ethical dilemmas by revealing the names of dissidents, by revealing the names of protesters and handing that information over. And so I also think like there are certain things that come along with all of this progress that I'm not too opposed to taking our time. I'm not sure that Europe and some other countries would still be willing to pay the price, because there is a price that is being paid for all of this technology. And frankly, the more sophisticated the technology, the AI, camera vision, the behavioral analytics, all of this type of stuff is creating a bit of a cage situation where there are less and less places to hide. And so I know culturally you're saying you don't mind sharing. I think people are going to feel differently when all of that information is then suddenly used against them. And this will be a very interesting test to see whether or not this scalability will be able to progress, and whether or not citizens of other countries are willing to hand over that extent to the technologies that are intruding in their personal lives.
I just want to highlight 2 points which look to me very important. So why Chinese digital market has been developing so fast. First of all, massive investment you have mentioned. So if we look at all the venture capital investment in the USA and in China, we have stronger culture of venture capital investment. And if we look at...
The Chinese are risk takers?
Yeah, very much. Like the Americans, we are very
You're
much...
listening to this, Denis.
Yeah, spiritual and entrepreneurship. And if we look at the Chinese venture capital investment, so in 2016, the BAT group in China is the Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So all the investment driven by the BAT group represented 42% of all the venture capital investment. And in the USA, the FNG group, Facebook, Amazon, and Netflix, and Google only represented 5% of all the venture capital investment. So we can see that in Chinese market, digital market, we are developing faster than the US market.
Well, they're also not burdened by the shifting agendas of different administrations every 4 years, where investment kind of peaks and flows and ebbs depending on that. So it's also nice to have a vision where you can make a decision and hold steady to that course for 10 years.
Of course, but generally speaking, I think we have very strong investment in China in this domain. And then the scale advantages are very important because in China, the number of populations is much bigger. And we have, for example, already 56% of the Chinese population connected to the internet, around 772 million, people in China, and we have very strong support from the Chinese government.
Strong support from the Chinese government. It's more than just support. If Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba, is out giving a speech, you know that he's not going to say anything that goes against what the Chinese Communist Party wants. Whereas in the U.S., there's a big difference. A lot of the Silicon Valley bosses supported the Democrats against Donald Trump. That's
different. That's different. I think in China, we have a separate system, and the mentality, the rules, the cultural codes are all different. So we need to look at that separately. But another point just want to highlight is that in China, we favor a test and adjust approach. In China, we don't, it's relatively easier to launch new concept, and the Chinese government don't impose new regulations immediately. It's after that we have tested some concepts. So then we can, do more experimentation and innovation.
Denis Jacquet, the nomenclatura of the Chinese Communist Party, many of them actually engineers, right, by training. A lot of them before becoming politicians. In France, we have a similar thing, don't we? Because a lot of the captains of industry come from the Polytechnique or whatever. They also go into politics or weigh heavily on the political system. It's sort of a mix, right, between the American entrepreneurial system and this Chinese very much state-sponsored system. Yeah. How's France faring alone or as part of the European Union when it comes to this brave new world we're talking about here?
Well, we have one of the youngest president on earth at this stage. So he understands quite clearly what is at stake with the digital economy, and he has been here only for 1 year. So maybe we should wait a little, but the thing is that even after 1 year, after gathering all these people with that tech for good, there's still not any strategy on digital coming from France. So that's what worries me.
But they've tried it before, these strategies, right? Creating a European search engine, creating European data libraries. And
the thing that Europe wants to play by the book. And nobody plays by the book. The US don't, the China don't, and even inside the European space, when you go to Germany, it's very complicated to access the public sector or the public tenders and everything. So, but we want to play by the book. And at this stage, nobody is doing that. So the thing is, you have the virtue on one side and the economic growth on the other side. So, and I think that at the end of the day, if we don't want any populists to come and take the seat of President Emmanuel Macron in 5 years, we need to have growth, we need to have jobs, and we need to have a strong economy. So at some point, we should find a way in the middle. And I think when you take the example of the search engine, which is called Quant, that we have in France, why don't we have a preference, even for 5 years, for a French, where each time you buy a smartphone, you have the icons of Quant instead of Google for 5 years, and then you let everybody goes to a competition, and it's not a problem. So it's not like in Russia saying, no, we don't want Google, we don't want Facebook. Yes, you are happy to join, you can compete on the market, but at least there's a European preference to grow champions and to have an existence within this world. So my preoccupation is that when will we have a strategy that is in the middle of the virtue and the economic growth? Yeah.
Ralph Harfouche, you agree?
I mean, I think as long, in a way, yes, but I think as long as we focus on the technology, we seem to only be chasing technology versus looking at the human implications. And whatever strategy we come up with, we're still going to be behind. I think if the EU is going to be ahead and is going to lead, it can't just be chasing what other countries are doing. I think we have to decide as a union, what is the technological vision that we want? What are the rules that we want? What are the data privacy values that we want? And then build technology that reflects that vision.
You heard Denis Jacquet in part one of our discussion express doubts over these new data protection rules that have come into force in Europe. Is that for you the right way to start?
I mean, I like that at least we're starting to have a conversation that at least you can start to see when you use a website that you recognize that this website is using pieces of the information that you're providing. I think most people just browse and they don't really make the connection. Do I think it was from a user experience, it was super annoying to suddenly have every website you've ever used in your life spam your inbox, letting you know that they've updated it? Yes, maybe the experience could have been done a little bit better. But do I think it's an important conversation starter? Absolutely. We need to start having these transparent conversations about what companies are collecting what information and what they're doing with it. That's also the only way forward, because economic growth isn't just going to be solved by more technology. In fact, more technology without the proper design for a human-centric experience is probably going to result in a lot less jobs anyway. So it's in our best interest for us to start with the vision instead of just running after what other countries are doing.
Chunyan Li, have you gone a bit native? Do you agree with Ralph?
I agree with that. I think we first need to have very clear vision, of to build the strategic planning, maybe in 5 years, 10 years. Then the way of how to use the data is very important. Yeah. In which domains, in which purposes, etc. By taking into account, of course, the fact that in Europe, the data privacy is very important, for the people in the daily life.
All right. Well, many thanks, Chunyan Li, Ralph Harfouche, Denis Jacquet. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James. How are you?
Hello. Joining the conversation here. So wanted to bring you a little bit of the reaction from American politicians online. They've been some of the most outspoken critics about this latest privacy incident with Facebook. They're probably feeling a little bit burned after Mark Zuckerberg came and testified for hours in front of these Congress committees, and now this is coming out too. So let's take a look at, this is Marco Rubio, Republican senator from Florida, saying this could be a very big problem if Facebook granted Huawei special access to social data of Americans. They might as well have given it directly to the government of China. And then Howard Dean, former Democratic governor of Vermont, saying this is a disgrace. I am closing my Facebook page. Followers are welcome to contact me on Twitter.
We've heard that one.
Yes, the delete Facebook movement.
Yeah, it didn't go so well, did it?
Yeah. So it's back a little bit. We'll get to that, though.
Right.
This is Ed Markey, another Democratic senator, saying Mark Zuckerberg needs to return to Congress and testify why Facebook shared Americans' private information with questionable Chinese companies. Our privacy and national security cannot be the cost of doing business. So we're already hearing from lawmakers saying they want him to come back for more questioning. And
hopefully they won't ask how spam works this time.
yeah, we did see some questionable understanding of how technology exactly worked. But judging from the reaction from politicians, I would guess that this makes it more likely that regulation is going to be coming down from the government. Another question that's being tossed around online a lot is, why didn't Facebook disclose this earlier when there were all these questions about their data privacy settings? And here's one Twitter user saying, to be honest, I trust Huawei, the heart of China's military computational complex, more than I trust Facebook. And the delete Facebook movement has been revived a little bit. We've seen people bringing that hashtag back. This user saying Mark Zuckerberg used to be a hero of the digital age, but now he has lived long enough to see himself become the villain. One tech company taking things into their own hands a bit with this, and that would be Apple, one of Facebook's rivals. CEO Tim Cook has kind of gone back and forth with Zuckerberg before about this issue, but he had an interview on CNN on Monday where he talked about privacy and said that he believes usually that companies should be able to set their own rules and regulate themselves, but that when it comes to privacy, he thinks that things have gotten totally out of control. A little bit of a dig at Facebook there.
Yeah, because Apple, one of those 60 companies that did business with Facebook, he says, I don't have a problem because it's encrypted and I don't know what's in this data from start to finish. Do you buy that argument, Ralph Arfouche?
I mean, to a point, yeah. I think also we need to remember that it wasn't like they were sneaking around doing anything. The reason I don't think they disclosed it was because it was covered under the agreement that we all agreed to when we used Facebook. So that needs to be, I think, the conversation, not not whether or not they broke the law, because I don't think they did, but more like what are the agreements, and do the agreements and the terms of service need to be revisited?
So Apple has come out now and said that they're going to be instituting some new features that are going to directly hit Facebook. So the new version of Safari that comes out is going to block some of the data tracking that Facebook does automatically, and they're also going to have a pop-up where you have to opt in to allow for data sharing.
All right, we'll be watching that. Many thanks for that, Charlie James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.